The party was louder than I anticipated. Glittering chandeliers, clinking glasses, and the murmur of laughter filled the air. My dress, a deep emerald green that hugged my curves, felt like armor as I stepped into the opulence of Jason's sprawling penthouse. Jason, my ex-boyfriend, was a successful businessman with the charm to match his fortune. But tonight, the sight of him with a new girl on his arms stung more than I wanted to admit. We'd broken up 2 months ago. 5 years. I'd spent 5 years loving Jason, hoping he'd notice how much I gave, how deeply I felt. But Jason, for all his charisma and success, never truly saw me. I remembered the nights waiting for him to come home from his endless meetings, dinners, and parties. I'd prepare his favorite meals, light candles, and put on the dress he once said made my eyes sparkle. He'd show up hours late, kiss my cheek absently with a scent of perfume that I never used, and head straight for his office. "Not tonight," he'd say when I suggested we spend a weekend together. "You know how busy things are." And I accepted it. Again and again. There was the time I planned a birthday dinner for him. I invited his closest friends, organized a private chef, and spent weeks making sure every detail was perfect. Jason didn't show up until dessert, casually mentioning that he'd gotten caught up with a client. I laughed it off even as the embarrassment and hurt burned inside me. As I loved him. So I stayed. I told myself he'd change. That one day he'd see how much I cared and start making me a priority. But the years dragged on and Jason remained Jason. Charming, distracted, and distant. The breakup was my decision, though it didn't feel like one. It felt like survival. The decision was made while I waited for him during the lonely night in the hospital after a small surgery. I still remember his voice behind me. "You know, you can never come back if you leave now. Tonight, I'm here at the party because it is for one of our common friends." But watching him with a pretty woman who couldn't be more than 22, I felt a mixture of anger and relief. Anger at how easily he'd moved on, relief that I was finally free. I grabbed a champagne flute from a passing waiter, desperate for something to dull the ache. "You look like you could use something stronger," a voice said from behind me. I turned to see a man at the bar, his dark eyes catching the light like smoldering embers. He was effortlessly handsome, his broad shoulders and tailored suit making him stand out even in this sea of wealth and beauty. I admitted, walking toward him, curiosity piqued. "Whiskey?" he offered, pouring a neat shot into a glass without waiting for my answer. "Why not?" I replied, taking the glass from him. His fingers brushed mine and a spark shot through me. We talked. About everything. About nothing. His name was Daniel and he had a quiet confidence that drew me in, a warmth that made the party fade into the background. By the time midnight rolled around, I didn't even notice Jason anymore. It wasn't planned. At least, that's what I told myself when I woke up in Daniel's hotel suite the next morning. His arm was draped over me, his breath warm against my neck. For a moment I panicked. I wasn't the kind of woman who did one-night stands. But as he stirred and looked at me, his sleepy smile made my worries melt away. "You're even more beautiful in the morning," he said, his voice husky. I laughed nervously, unsure of how to respond. He sat up, his expression serious now. "You don't remember me, do you?" I frowned. "Should I? We went to high school together. I was 2 years ahead of you. Quiet kid. Glasses. Always sitting in the back of the class." Recognition hit me like a freight train. "Daniel, right? You were a nerd," he finished with a grin. "Yeah, I know. But I had the biggest crush on you back then." I stared at him, stunned. The Daniel Wright I remembered was shy and quiet, not this magnetic, confident man in front of me. I do remember his eyes were on me from a distance at parties, but he never made his way come talk to me. "You've changed," I said, still trying to wrap my head around it. "So have you," he replied softly. "But you're still the same woman I couldn't stop thinking about." His words stayed with me. At first I thought it was just flattery, but as we spent more time together, I realized Daniel wasn't like Jason. He remembered little details I mentioned, how I loved thunderstorms, the scent of lavender, and how I dreamed of visiting Tuscany one day. One evening he surprised me with a small pot of lavender for my apartment. "To make your space smell like you love," he said, smiling shyly. Another time he sent me a link to a documentary about Tuscany with a simple message. "Thought you might enjoy this." The gestures weren't grand, but they were thoughtful. Genuine. Slowly my guard began to crumble. Then Jason came back into the picture. At first it was just casual texts. "Hey, hope you're doing well," or "saw something today that reminded me of you." I didn't respond. Then came the late night calls. "I miss you," he admitted one evening. "I thought I could move on, but I can't. You're everything to me." I wanted to believe him. For years I'd dreamed of hearing those words. But now they felt hollow. He escalated. He sent flowers to my office, left voicemails begging me to talk to him, and even cornered me outside my apartment one evening. "Please just give me another chance," he said, his voice raw. "I know I was a fool. I took you for granted. But I can't lose you." I felt nothing but exhaustion. "Jason," I said softly, "I waited for you for 5 years. I loved you with everything I had. And you threw it away. I'm not waiting anymore." That night I met Daniel for dinner. He was quiet at first, watching me with a mix of concern and hesitation. "Was that Jason at your place?" he finally asked. "It was," I admitted. "He wants me back." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. "I told him no," I added quickly. His eyes softened. "Why?" I reached across the table and took his hand. "Because I finally know what it feels like to be truly wanted." A slow smile spread across his face. In that moment I realized I'd never felt safer, more seen, or more loved. This was my happiness. This was my future.